I'm not a techno geek.
The complaint of every old man.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, that's exactly right.
We need to consult with Caleb. Caleb's probably that younger generation.
Yeah.
I try to keep
All
up
he's
with
gonna
it,
say
but
is, yeah, you old guys. That's what he's going to say. You old guys.
Yeah.
By the way, Brian, have you seen the trailers for the Fantastic Four?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
You look just like John Malkovich. I can't be the first person to tell you that.
Well, I know, but it is funny. Once in a while, I get a contrast with that. Yeah. So, yeah. And he's the bad guy, I'm sure. So.
Well, they're not really sure who he's playing at this point. There are two or three possibilities.
I look like there's a guy named Levin on Fox News. They say, well, you look like him. There's one person we know that actually has confused me with Dave Ramsey.
David Ramsey.
Yeah, that's happened too. Now I usually say, well, really, if you have a white beard and you're bald, you just fit in a certain stereotype of people, and that's what you look like.
See,
Mark
Kojak.
Levin.
If Kojak had a beard, I'd look like Kojak.
Yeah, Kojak was the standard for all bald men many years ago.
Yeah. Then it became Captain Picard, and then
Yeah.
In Chattanooga, Tennessee, it was Mort Lloyd. He was a news anchor, and he ran for U.S. Congress and was killed or died. And his wife stepped in and ran in his stead and was elected and served several terms.
Real quick bookkeeping. I am waiting for a heater technician to show up at our house today, so it's possible I may suddenly duck out and be gone. So I don't know what that'll look like. So
all right,
just can't stand the heat. Get out of the oven or kitchen, I guess.
Yeah. Well, oven too, I guess. It's even hotter in the oven.
I guess we could say Brian has cold feet, so he had to abandon the study.
That's right. That's right.
Have the pews clean, they told me. Oh, wow. Kayla, that's
anything
long time ago.
Is there anything? Should I not be seeing something below the pictures, or is everything in the upper right corner?
So it seems everything
upper
is
right
up top.
Here.
Yeah.
Chat. Four people.
All right, so we'll see what happens here.
We're going to start here in a minute. John 13.
I'm going to step off a second. Go ahead and get started without me, if that's okay, John.
Yeah.
Sorry to.
I won't call on you to read. All right, let's see. Yeah, we'll start here a little bit. John chapter 13. And
today we're going to talk about the sins of Brian Haynes.
yeah.
That'd make a good TV movie.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Years ago, Angie Dickinson played in The Sins of Rachel Cade.
I hadn't heard of that or seen it.
Well,
Amazon.
It wasn't much of a movie.
Amazon's supposed to be coming out with the series supposedly based on David. And
the
something
House
like
of David.
Yeah, and the Goliath was just the beginning of the story or something other like that.
Yeah. It looked like it's going to be pretty good.
Yeah. See how they handle it.
Right. Yeah. You know, our brethren have put together some good video things with history. I mean, not necessarily stories like that, but I know the Appian Media, they've done it. And there's actually a couple of more that I learned about last week that are trying to do the same thing as far as, historical relevance and interviews with people that know what they're talking about.
Is it more like interview based or kind of like a live action replay of it?
those are more interview based. Now you know the Appian Media. I don't know if you ever been to Appian Media. That was Barry Britnell and Jeremy D. Hutt, I think it is, and they've actually gone to the Bible lands, and they've just kind of traced the footsteps of Jesus and gone back to some of the Old Testament characters, David, the life of David, and just showing what's there archaeologically, and those types of things. They're very, very fascinating and true to God's word as far as application.
Okay.
Is Barry the son of Eugene Britnell?
Eugene, yes, I believe
It
so.
is.
Yeah, I believe Barry Britnell is. So.
I really like Eugene, or Gene.
Let me grab one more.
He moderated
Yeah, I
for
knew
me in
him.
my debate.
He'd call me knucklehead every time he saw me, but if I understand correctly, he did that for a lot of people. So.
Well, he never dishonored me in that way.
There was no affection there.
It was just respect.
Yeah, there you go. So
He's back.
I'm back, ready to go, guys.
Will Brenner.
Yul Brynner. Yeah, there's another ball or hairless.
Follicularly challenged is the term
That's
we
it.
prefer.
Follicular.
Although he didn't even have whiskers.
Follicularly challenged.
Yeah. All right, let's see. All right, got a couple of things we'll talk about here in just a moment. We will fade out and we'll be right back. Greetings. Welcome back to another Truth Factor discussion. Today we will be continuing our study in John chapter 13, there at verse 1. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us for our study today. We have Caleb with us, Thomas is with us, of course, but Jimmy and David Cambridge and David Clark as well, and there may be others. If you've joined us for the first time, and whether it's on our Facebook page, the live stream there, or on our YouTube channel, live stream also, both of those are Truth Factor Live. You can participate in the study by dropping a comment either in the Facebook side of the world or a comment in the chat area on YouTube also. Now, if you normally watch it through the website, truthfactor.com, and you're having trouble with that site, well, I don't know what's wrong. Every time I try to look at it this morning, it gives me an error, server error 500. So I've put in a support ticket to see if they can figure out what's wrong maybe on their end is what I'm thinking. But for now, it's just straight through our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel. Let's see. We have just 4 of us today. Paul is unable to be with us, and Brendan, I think he's still down in the Outback, isn't he? His life has gotten busy. And but hopefully we'll be able to see him again a little bit later. Tom, how was your trip down to Florida?
It was good. It was good meeting up with some people and various things that we did while we were down there.
Good. Well, welcome back.
It's good to be back.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to pick up in John chapter 13 today, and we are basically the day that the Passover is going to begin. Hours leading up to that, Jesus is basically preparing for that with his disciples. Then they will eat the Passover feast, and then as we go through John, we are in the last days of Jesus' life, really before his death. And I do like to clarify, whenever we say the last days of Jesus' life, it is in direct relation to when he's going to die physically. I know that he will arise from the grave and will spend another 40 days upon this earth and then ascend up to his Father's. But these are the final days prior to his death, final hours really prior to his death. And so let's start there in John chapter 13. And let's go ahead and read, it's a little bit longer of a section. Let's go ahead and read, I'm sorry. let's break this up here for just a moment. Now, let's go ahead and read all the way down to verse 17. Tom, would you mind taking this large bite out of the text for us? John 13, 1 through 17, please.
I can do that. John 13, 1 through 17. And again, I'm reading out of the New King James Bible. So we read, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put it in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose up from supper, and laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wash them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What I am doing you do not understand, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, You are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments and sat down, he said to them, Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, Well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.
All righty. Thank you, Mr. Tom. So there's a lot here within the text, although the text is dealing with a kind of a singular event that Jesus shares here with his disciples, with his apostles there. But there's a couple things at the start of this time I kind of want to get your opinion on. He makes a statement there. So, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Have you ever given thought to, and not trying to read more into it than what's there, but what is he referencing when he says that he loved them to the end?
Yeah, I believe he's saying until he died on the cross, and you might even say until he ascended to heaven. And bear in mind that all of the Gospels are accounts of the life of Jesus written by individuals after Jesus was gone. I mean, the very earliest of the Gospels, as far as we know, would have been 20 to 30 years after, if not even a little bit longer. The fifth, maybe you could plug Mark's Gospel into the late 40s or something to that effect. Or Matthew's Gospels. There are some who think that maybe Matthew was the first Gospel. There's all kinds of apologetic debate. John is clearly the last of the Gospels, and everybody acknowledges that. And I know there's those who put this book 67 AD, a good possibility. Others put it in the 80s to early 90s.
Yeah.
But whatever the case, he's looking back. And so he's about to describe the conversation that took place in the event, but he starts by introducing it from that standpoint.
Yeah.
So
he loved them,
loved
them to the end. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there is another point I have that I want to,
Sure.
I can touch on it when you're ready for it, but I want to lay a little bit of a background for what Jesus is doing here.
In the primary section.
Yeah, the washing of their feet. I want to lay some background on that. And when you're ready for that, let me know.
All righty. Here in a minute, you can reveal your soul to us. Foot washing, soul. Okay. So the next question is in verse number 2. So we read the statement here, the devil having already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Any thoughts on this? Is it something as simple as a temptation because of Judas's covetous heart, or could there be something very specific and direct? Any thoughts?
If you're asking me, my answer to that is yes and yes.
Okay.
I don't think anybody was ever tempted to sin where they had no control over it.
Okay.
But this is a circumstance, and several of the things happening around this time, including Peter's denial, I think they're stronger than just a basic temptation from that standpoint. Satan is obviously exploiting a weakness or a corruption that is in Judas that has already been touched on in the Gospel of John and in the other Gospels as well. Those types of things. But the bottom line is what you have taking place here is Satan is the one that's going to do this. Now, also another thing that comes to my mind is, remember, back then we're dealing with a time of demon possession.
Okay.
And we don't fully understand everything about that. And we know that Jesus was able to cast out demons, but it was on the cross where this greater defeat of Satan takes place. And I think a greater limitation on what demons were going to be capable of doing. Just bear in mind, this is before the cross.
True.
So that is something that you might want to factor into this. But Judas is by no means innocent.
Okay. All right. Brian, Bob, any thoughts?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about here, there's a couple of references about Satan working with Judas in Luke chapter 22 and John 13. There's a statement that says that Satan entered Judas. And again, I agree. I think Tom said it well to say we're not talking about the idea of a demonic possession where Judas had no control over his actions. We're talking about the same, that what I would say is the same as what happened in Matthew chapter 16 when Jesus told Satan to get behind, or told Peter, get behind me, Satan. That we're talking about the idea that because Peter was being mindful of the world, he was behaving in a satanic way. So that would be my comment.
Okay. That makes sense. We will use similar language today. Maybe we pull it from passages like this when we will make a direct statement that says, well, the devil tempted me. And Peter paints the picture like the devil goes about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. But Tom, I understand what you're saying too, as far as this being before the cross. This was somewhat unique of a situation, but yet what Brian brought up about the way Jesus addressed Peter in his statement might be a similar indicator as to what's going on here. Judas has the role to play, and his role that he is going to play is in part wrapped up within his covetousness. And what he's about to do in the betrayal of Jesus, it is a sin, quite clearly. Even if Jesus wasn't the Messiah, it's still a sin, what he sets about to do. And but I wonder sometimes if I guess we don't know for certain whether or not this was the case of the Lord knew, all right, this is the time, and Judas is now being tempted from within his own heart, but it's attributed to Satan because of the work that's being done, or if it was more of a direct temptation. But you're right, though. You said a while ago that he was accountable. It was his own responsibility, and I agree with that. But we tend to say the same thing today. Well, the devil's tempting us. He's tempting us and everything. But
right, yeah. This is what happens here is very consistent with the character of Judas, and that is the bottom line. Satan would have no power over Judas if Judas were not of this character. And that's the point. When we talk about what influence Satan can have in our lives today, and understand very clearly he can. I've said in sermons, it is foolish to dismiss the power of Satan. Even to this day, we're not dealing with miracles. We're not dealing with the ability to possess and take over like that. But depending on the way you live your life, you can very easily give Satan power over you from the standpoint of temptations and the degree to which they affect you, and they're able to do what is necessary. It's still all on you.
Yeah.
You can't say like Flip Wilson, the devil made me do it. It's on you because you've allowed that in your life.
Yeah. For you younger people, Flip Wilson was a comedian from many years ago. Had a stand-up routine. We got to watch our old references here, guys. And really the power lies within the level of temptation. You and I may face a temptation that we don't find very, tempting. But then where our weaknesses lie, that's where the temptation becomes the greatest. And that's where, oftentimes people fail. In this case, we see Judas doing it. Yeah. So 2 comments real quick. Jimmy asks a question. Let's go ahead and bring it in here real quick about Judas. He says, do you think possibly that Judas was teaching false prophecy? Was that what he was referring to when he betrayed him? I don't think it wasn't so much false prophecy, although Judas may have been in trying to, verbally discourage Jesus or kind of hinder Jesus' thinking on it maybe. But here it's when he sold him for 30 pieces of silver. And John's looking back at that moment there. Yeah. And then Caleb says, and I think it's a good point. Let me bring it up here. There we go. Judas could have repented, but chose to hang himself. Yeah. Peter repented of what he did. He went out and wept bitterly. Judas, on the other hand, although he did try to give them back the 30 pieces of silver, he could not undo what he had done and couldn't live with that. Any thoughts on those 2 comments? No? Okay. We lost Bob. He's having some technical issues on his end. So, all right, let's see. Now, so they rose from supper, and then Jesus began the process of laying aside his garments, took a towel, probably the outer garments is more what he laid aside, took a towel, girded himself, poured water into a basin, and then he began with the towel to wash their feet. So, Tom, you said you had some thoughts, some background information you want to kind of lay out for us here.
Yeah. First of all, I don't think we mentioned this at the beginning, but I assume most of the people listening know, but this is the night of the betrayal of Jesus. So yes. You've got the idea of before the feast of the Passover. We're in that final week. And what's interesting is chapters 13 through 16, and you may even include 17 in that, are a lengthy discourse that Jesus has with the apostles and interactions on the night. This is very likely the same occasion that we read about in the other Gospels, where Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. So very likely that's what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
But the other interesting observation I want to make is as we find Jesus washing the disciples' feet, this is one of those examples of where it's good to have 4 Gospels, because I believe the other Gospels give us what is going on that causes Jesus to do this. And I would appeal in particular to Luke chapter 22. And in Luke chapter 22 and verse 24, you read in that passage, it says, now there was a dispute among them as to which of them would be considered the greatest. And so Jesus talks about the Gentiles lording it over them, and he talks about how they need to be servants. I picture what's happening in John is Jesus is listening to them argue. argue about this
Yeah.
greatness. And by the way, it's not the first time. Matter of fact, in Luke
Correct.
chapter 9, that was Luke 22, and Luke is somewhat chronological, more chronological than Matthew and Mark. And in Luke chapter 9, you find the same type of arguing. Matthew chapter 20, this is verses 20 through 28. This is where Mary, the mother of James and John, comes to Jesus and makes the request that they sit on his right and his left. And the way that's recorded in Matthew, that was before Jesus entered the city. So if that's the case, you have several occasions where the apostles just keep arguing with themselves about, who's going to be the greatest? The kingdom's about to be established. And they're jockeying for prominent position and so on. And I can just picture while they're arguing, Jesus just goes and gets a bowl and a pitcher with water and starts pouring the water into the pitcher and grabs a towel. And as he's doing all of this, I can see it quieting down, the arguing, and all of a sudden it's silent. And then Jesus goes and he starts to do this act. And they're saying, "What are you doing?" And of course, it's going to go from there. And he said, "I'll explain it to you when I get done."
I think that's a good observation, a good possibility that that argument, their discussion precipitated this. Yeah. Any other thoughts about that?
I think Tom's comments are really great. I really like what Tom was saying though about the idea that the multi-gospel requirement is necessary here, because one of the things I've always said about John that's interesting is John writes with the expectation that the other gospels are known to the reader.
Yes.
When he's talking about where Jesus is born, it's clear he thinks we already know that. I mean, the way he's writing it, it's so very clear that he knows that we know Jesus is born in Bethlehem. Here he knows that we know we've just had the Lord's Supper. And Tom's point is fantastic and a really good catch to say, look, they've been arguing about who's the greatest in this moment. I love the imagery here because it makes it so very understandable how offended everybody got by this. I've often thought about, I really have thought about if I had a men's Bible study, what it would be like if I, took off my shirt and got down and started to wash everyone's feet. People would be offended. Now, to be fair, there is an absence of a cultural, expectation on this,
yeah.
but it certainly wasn't something that was appropriate as far as this goes. It was an extreme action, and Peter's response, is actually, I think, a very reasonable one. Don't you dare wash my feet. This is not, I can't let you humiliate yourself like that in front of me.
That's beneath you.
Yeah, that's beneath you, which, isn't this a testimony to the whole concept of God becoming a man and dying on our behalf? The Philippians 2 statement about Jesus humbling himself before us. This is an immediate visual representation of the humiliation that God puts himself through to become flesh and to die for our sins. It was washing feet, as you could say, the dirtiest job. And becoming human was a dirty thing, in a way. And that sense that God put on flesh, it really is I don't know. I'm really struck by how profound this moment is. And, and Tom, I'm only building on what Tom said. It's just really a great point to think about.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. It's interesting. And maybe we want to at some point discuss why we don't need to wash disciples' feet the disciples' feet today. And I think the context bears it out. Only the feet are dirty. And I was listening to a sermon a couple of months ago of a gospel preacher about somebody who did this and who tried to do this. And the people were actually put off by his attempts to do that. And they ignore that, it's spam. you know, I mean, they were put off by it, and he said, I don't understand. Why would they be so upset? So, well, you're telling them their feet are dirty. Where in reality, they had socks on and shoes, and more than likely, it wasn't the same situation.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. But
Bob, you had your hand up.
Well, Brian kind of said what I was going to say. Maybe not in the words that I would have said it, but yeah, foot washing was a practice usually done by the lowliest servant in the house, and it was because people wore sandals generally, and their feet were dusty, dirty, and they would need their feet washed. Whereas when we come to services, we've already showered and washed our feet, and as Thomas pointed out, we put on socks or hose and shoes, and there's just no need for it. Even Jesus pointed out when Peter says, "Wash my head and feet, head too." Well, you don't need your head washed. It was his feet, because the feet were close to the ground. The feet were the ones that were gathering the dust and the dirt, and the perspiration, of course, flowed down the legs and created mud with the dust, and so it was needful. That's why they generally washed feet when they had a guest in. And again, if there were servants in the house, it was the lowliest servant that would do that. And so this, to me, is a lot of what it is. And I appreciate Thomas bringing in the passage from Luke. Jesus is taking this lowly position, and they don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I don't know why they would be offended so much as surprised, but at any rate, they didn't think that they were worthy of having their feet washed by Jesus, because that would make Jesus lower than themselves. But it is Jesus who is lowering himself, and that should have been sufficient for them. But they just had to think it through, and Jesus had to help them think it through.
Yeah, they would definitely respected Jesus for who he was. That's the whole thing about all of this. Even Judas. I think even Judas. We've discussed this in previous lessons, where more than likely Judas thought Jesus was going to get away with it again. Hey, I'm easy money for me. I get 30 pieces of silver. Jesus is going to work his way out of this, and yes, he could have. I think 72,000 angels by just saying no. I mean, he could have worked his way out of it. And Judas thought that was going to happen. And so, I mean, all of them knew who Jesus was and had that respect for him. And they weren't about to see him lower himself to this point. But Jesus gives the lesson at the end.
But, speaking of Judas Iscariot, I have a feeling he would be smiling, puffing out his chest, as if being the treasurer, he's the most trusted of the disciples, and I think he would be proud in this moment. It would be a false pride based upon a misconception of what his real place was and what the place of Jesus was. But I kind of feel like Judas Iscariot might have been the exception on the offensive side. I think he might have been proud as punch to have his feet washed by Jesus.
And by the way, you bring up a point that we have to think about in this entire context. Jesus knows who Judas is. Jesus knows what Judas is about to do. And Judas is there while he is washing their feet. It is not until he finishes washing their feet that Judas leaves. So here it is, Jesus is washing the feet, not only of these knuckleheads who are arguing about greatness, he's washing the feet of the one that he knows is about to go out and sell him.
Okay. If you can still, I'm going to keep talking. My camera went offline for just a second. I'll solve it here in a minute. Let me bring in real quick David Clark's comment, since we brought it back around to Judas again. David Clark said earlier, Judas was greedy. He wanted to be like Jesus. And I think we have an issue there, and I think that's a very good point. And this kind of touches on a little bit of what y'all all are talking about. Let me see if I can get that going. And that is, the apostles oftentimes, probably some of them may have viewed themselves on a higher level. So you can't see my hands, but anyway, you have Jesus, then the apostles, and then everybody else. And we still kind of look at it that way as far as the authority of the apostles. But he even told the apostles that they would sit on 12 thrones and reign with him of sort. That's a bad paraphrase, but he makes that statement to them. And maybe it's going to their head, like what's already been said about Judas, And so with the conversation that we're having, this would be a good time to illustrate, to show them that they are all to follow his example here of humility. Any thoughts or comments on this?
I think you're right.
All right. Let's see if I can get my camera back on. All right. Well, let's go ahead. I'll come back to that here in a minute. Y'all don't have to see my pretty face. We'll come back to it here in a minute. Let's see.
Yeah, just to mention with John, we're trying some new formats. Yeah, and I think we're dealing with Windows right now, aren't we?
No,
and,
this is USB. My camera decided to. I'll step out of the way here in a second once we're reading, and I'll unplug and replug it back up. That should
but we're trying some new things. We're trying some new systems and so on to help us with our timing, and that's what we're dealing with now. So bear with us with technical issues here and there.
All right. Yep. All right, Brian, what were you saying?
Oh, nothing. I see we have another comment from Stephanie in our YouTube. It's a good comment.
Yeah, let's bring that in real quick. Go ahead and read that if you like to, Brian.
Yeah. I thought that verse 10 was saying that the disciples were spiritually clean, but that they needed to wash their feet only so as to keep themselves on the correct path of righteousness. So it's kind of interesting. That's an interesting comment, Stephanie. And the idea of being spiritually clean or not, Jesus does have a sense about spirituality many times. In this case, you can even go further to say, what is it that we have contact in the world with? Well, our feet, they're what's between us, us and the world. And so, there could even be a symbolism in that. But I really think that the bigger idea is less about the apostles' cleanliness or things like that, and more about Jesus's willingness to cleanse that part of them that is unclean. And I think maybe it even speaks to the idea of, that Jesus is going to cleanse all of us of our uncleanness, that he's going to be, solving all of our issue of uncleanness where we're in contact with the world. So, that could be some of that language too. That's an interesting comment there. That there is this, we can play with a lot of these metaphors, right? Of, you're on a path, you're walking, that's the way of Christ. So as it's described. And so you can see something there too. I like this comment a lot.
Yeah, I do too.
I think also he brings in the idea of spiritual cleanness, even as he answers response to this. He says, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet. That, of course, that's physical. But is completely clean to the extent physical. But I think he makes a transition there to the spiritual. And you are clean, but not all of you. And then, for he knew who would betray him. Therefore, he said, you are not all clean. So he's identifying, or he's got Judas Iscariot in mind there when he says, you are not all clean. So there he's not talking about physical cleanliness, but spiritual cleanliness.
Right. You know, and there's that example of a transition from physical analogy or physical demonstration to spiritual analogy, which is what the parables were about. And that's a good point. And that's a good point. But there's a transition here, you know, from the physical to the spiritual.
Okay. Now, let's see. There's one more point I want to make before we'll come back to it here in just a second. One more thing I want to talk about, but let's go on through the rest of the section here. Good discussion on it, and especially the identification of one of you. You are not all clean. In verse 12, he says, so when they had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he then says this to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I've given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. And Tom, you're talking about transition. This really kind of tells us the purpose behind Jesus doing this. What was his message to them? Showing them the humility that they need to show towards one another.
Yeah. I mean, he's driving home the point. I chose you not to be kings.
Yeah.
I chose you to serve. I chose you to serve me, and I chose you to serve others. And you're going to learn very quickly, and I think, you know, as if Jesus is saying this, you're going to learn very quickly that it's about serving other people.
Yeah.
It's not about you drawing attention and honor to yourself. You all are going to receive the highest of honors. And by the way, they deserved it. You're going to receive the highest of honors, but don't let it go to your head. You know, I think of the example of Paul's thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians 12. You know, I mean, coming on the heels of, I know of a man who was caught up to the third heaven. You know, I mean, and clearly the text is implying that he's talking about himself. And one of the reasons he's qualified to be an apostle, because he saw the risen Lord, physically. So you have that taking place here. But then he says, lest I should be exalted above myself, a thorn in the flesh was given to me. So there was this humility that he knew that he had to have. And Jesus wants them to get, and they're going to get it. They're going to get it shortly after this. After Jesus arises from the dead, they get to the day of Pentecost. They get it. And they do have some slip-ups. Galatians chapter 2, but they're going to understand that the way we lead is by serving.
Yeah. Think about modern day times in the political world. Think about an ambassador from a certain country coming over here to the United States. And you'll hear stories where they break the law. They will abuse their power, and then they'll claim some sort of ambassadorial immunity or something other like that. Those people cause you to look poorly upon the citizens of the country that they've come from, because they have let it go to their head and assumed more authority than what they had. And this would have been a temptation for the apostles. But you're right. Once here, a little bit later, they're going to learn very directly what they're going to have to suffer. And I'm also reminded of the authority they possessed, and were not afraid to use it, if you would. Like in the case in point of, in Acts chapter 13 with Sergius Paulus, where Paul and Barnabas was trying to teach him, and the Jewish exorcist named, couldn't remember his name. Anyway. Bar Jesus. Yeah. Also called something else, wasn't he? Yeah. Elymas, also called Bar Jesus. That's it. He tried to stop them from teaching Sergius Paulus, and they, through the Holy Spirit, of course, they exercised their apostolic authority in that sense, and struck him. And but they could never walk around and say, hey, look how great that we are. It's like when the 72 came back, or 70 came back, and they said, hey, even the demons were subjected to us. And Jesus effectively says, don't rejoice over this. You know, and so a very needed reminder here.
Right, yeah. And incidentally, everything that we have discussed here, this is why foot washing is not a ritual. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Jesus was doing something that back then was a clear indication of a needed service when you entered into a house.
When
we
someone,
don't need that today.
Yeah. Not, you know, and not for them to say, when, let's say someone comes over to their house, say, well, I'm an apostle, you need to wash my feet. You know,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you said that, Paul or Tom, because that's kind of the point I wanted to bring up real quick. We have to be very careful as we study the scriptures and make certain that we don't bind where the Bible doesn't bind. There are those of the mindset who would look at this statement, you also ought to wash the feet of one another, and say, aha, we now have to wash one another's feet. And that's where it's poor biblical study to draw a conclusion from a context that does not establish that conclusion.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's why a proper study involves not only what the text actually says, but the externals, the background that is behind it. And this is an example of culture and leading into that. But now we need to be careful in making that argument too, because there are some who want to dismiss laws, saying, well, that was the culture back then. Well, but in this case, it's clearly the point.
Yeah. Read the verses around it.
Yep.
Okay.
That's where you start.
I don't want to get into a rant on this, okay? And I do, boy, this is going to be taken the wrong way right off the bat. But I think 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. All right, there's an example of when to lay by and store, first day of the week. But you have to be careful with that, because if you look at it more than an example of when we could lay by and store, and you look at it as a direct command, well, look at the rest of the verses, okay? You're supposed to lay by and store so that there will be no gatherings when I come. Well, in the command, it implies that when Paul came and picked up the funds that they laid by and stored, it then begs the question, did they continuing lay by and store for Paul on his next trip? You know, and so it serves as an example of when the church should lay by and store for the work of the local church. But we have to keep all the verses together so that we understand the context of what's being said there. And if you have any thoughts or comments about that, send it to Brian at truthfactor.com.
You know, also, there are other things like that. Holy kiss, lifting up holy hands in prayer.
Yeah.
I know a preacher who feels like he's obligated to hold up his hands during prayer.
Wow.
Because of what Paul said to Timothy, holding up your, or Paul said to somebody, holding up.
Timothy, 1 Timothy 2.
Raise up, hold.
Yeah.
But he's not commanding them to hold up their hands. He's just saying, make sure that when you hold up your hands, they're holy. That there's nothing in your life that would prevent you from rightly expecting your prayers to be heard by God. Okay. And there was an artificial covering, and that, I know that's debated, but it seems to me that there was a custom in the first century for women to cover their heads in general, and but some were in Corinth were taking it off, which violated the custom, but also it violated what the custom represented, which it represented an acknowledgement of the headship of the man. And that was why he tells them not to uncover their heads when they worship.
That's right.
Because you're not recognizing the headship of the man over you. Not because the covering itself was required, but the acknowledgement of headship.
Yeah.
In 1 Corinthians chapter 11 there.
And that's Bob at truthfactor.com. So,
Yeah.
But I think that's a very valid point. There's so often, even in today's time period, customs can become commands. Not saying with authority, of course, but the old story is told, if you go back many years, of where when they had the Lord's Supper setting out and the windows were open because they didn't have central heat and air. I was told years ago they would lay a cloth over the table. And that cloth kind of became an ornament over the table, or to ornate maybe. And then at some point down the line, somebody, AC, they got a new building, central heat and air, whatever, and someone says, well, we don't need this anymore. It highly offended the congregation because what had been done for the last 50 years wasn't done any longer. The need for it was no longer there, but what had become a practice or a custom now had become something that was bound. And you have to, again, come back to Bible authority.
And I
just
heard,
respect that.
I don't know if it was a joke or an anecdote, but of two ladies that felt opposite regarding that cloth. And one of them would remove the cloth and the other one would go up there and replace it. And whether the cloth was over the Lord's Supper or not, depending upon at what point service was started, which of the two ladies had just been up there.
Oh, man, I had to be in the bathroom a little bit too long. I couldn't get up there and pull that covering off.
Yeah.
That's what you get for doing your makeup in the bathroom. Sorry. All right, we've digressed. I've digressed. But anyway, here's an example of something that people have bound and taken it beyond what Jesus had intended it, and the reason why John recorded it as well. Coming in from the Facebook side of the world, David Clark says, all things can be confusing. True. But the Word of God is not. We just have to respect the Word and not try. I believe in mining the Scriptures, if you would, where you try to look and see what's there, and the more you study, the more you learn. But I think because of the way things are divided up in book, chapter, and verses for us, it's very easy sometimes to single out a verse that normally would have been in a longer paragraph or longer writing and let that verse become something that it was not intended to be. Rightly handling the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2, verse 15? Yeah. All right, any other thoughts or comments about this? Okay. All righty, with all that said and done, come back here to the text for just a moment. And, that's what we talked about there in verse 15, the abuse of that. But the ultimate point was for them to show this humility towards one another, not to elevate one over the other. And that also rules out the idea of Peter being like the head apostle, if you would, or even James being the head of the church, in Jerusalem. There is no head within local congregations other than the shepherds, and the role is to shepherd the congregation. They are not the head of the congregation. Christ is the head of the church there.
And I was going to bring that up a while ago, and I forgot it, but even the elders are to rule by example.
Yes.
Shepherd the flock. You lead them, you don't drive them.
Yeah, that's right. And the authority of the elders fundamentally exists only within the Word. I've used I like this example. The elders can't tell you, well, on Thursday, you have to wear a blue shirt because we said so, the elders. Elders don't have that authority. Now, the elders can say, listen, we heard you went out drinking on Thursday. You need to stop that because the Bible says it.
Thou shalt not drink.
Yeah, or something close to that.
Thou shalt not go out and drink on Thursday.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't say Friday.
Yeah. All righty. Sorry. We're getting near the end of our time. You can tell, can't you?
We're going to change the name of the show to digressionfactor.com. That's where we're headed. Yeah.
We could probably carry a lot of things under that that name. All right, so yeah. So verse 16 and 17, most assuredly I say to you, here's the point of sorts, if you would. A servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. All right, so the apostles were not greater than Christ, and they were supposed to show the same humility towards one another, not just one another as apostles, but one another as Christians. And if you do these things, blessed are you if you do them. All right, any thoughts or any comments about that? All right. Let's see. We've got really only 5 minutes before we hit the top of the hour. Let's plan to pause this until next Thursday. In the next section here, we're going to see basically Jesus talking about the one who would betray him. And so we have this conversation that takes place about this. And there's a good bit here that we might want to talk about. So we'll plan to continue with verse 18 of John chapter 13 next week. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right, listen, if you have any thoughts or comments you'd like to share with us, and maybe you're viewing this study at a later point in time, you can send those to questions@truthfactorlive.com. questions@truthfactorlive.com. If you want to email us individually, you can use the email addresses you'll see on the screen. It's real simple, John at, Paul at, Tom at, etc., truthfactor.com. Or communicate with us on our Facebook page, which is Truth Factor Live. We'll also monitor that too. Okay. All righty. Well, I want to thank everyone for their thoughts and their comments within the chat room, and really appreciate you setting aside time to join us for our study. And gentlemen, I appreciate you being able to take the time for this study as well. All righty. Well, let's call it good for now, and we will plan to continue our study next Thursday at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time. As we continue to factor the Word of God into our lives, we'll pick up in John chapter 13, verse 18. Have a wonderful week.